Audrey Heron. Ask her friends and family to characterize Audrey Heron, and you'll likely hear adjectives like vivacious, caring, and spunky. Audrey was a part-time nurse at the Columbia Green Long-Term Healthcare Facility, a nursing home in the Catskill hamlet. According to the staff and residents, Audrey was very well liked. Audrey looked to be destined for the nursing profession, and her oldest daughter remembered how much Audrey loved her work in an interview with Crime Watch Daily. Work. About Audrey's life outside from her job, hardly much is known. At the age of 22, she gave birth to her first child, Sancha. She then married Jeff Heron, the son of a wealthy golf course owner, and the two of them had two more children, Quinn, a son, and Katie, a girl, 2 years later. The people Audrey's family and friends liked Jeff well overall. Sancha recalled that Jeff never showed her any different treatment and cared for her as if she were his own child, even though she was still under the care of her real father. Audrey went home for the night on August 29, 2002, after a bad evening at work, perhaps around 11 o'clock. The 31-year-old made her way back to her freehold home, which is roughly 12 to 15 miles from her place of employment, through rain and fog. CCTV footage, recovered in blurry form from Cumberland Farms, shows Audrey leaving the nursing home parking lot and driving west on State Route 23 in the Jefferson Heights neighborhood of Catskill. The vehicle was a black 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee registered in New York with license plates X233UV. She anticipated to return to Freehold by this path. Sadly, Audrey's voyage is not captured on any additional CCTV, and she never made it home. Jeff called friends and family the next morning in an attempt to locate his missing wife, but no one had seen her. This fact alarmed him, so he called Audrey's stepmother, who worked at the New York State Police Division headquarters. Officers were sent right away to the family's residence and the 31-year-old's place of business. Authorities were led to believe by multiple hints that Audrey wasn't a fugitive who had chosen to go and establish a new life elsewhere. She had abandoned all three of her children, to start with. For the final month prior to Audrey's disappearance, her eldest daughter, Sonia, then 10 years old, had been vacationing in Florida with her maternal grandmother. The morning after her disappearance, the 31-year-old was scheduled to see a doctor and was expected to pick up Sancha. Family members said Audrey is a loving mother and don't think she would have moved out without her kids. She also never showed up for her visits with her doctor. If she had intended to go, it would have been strange for her to have made it. Law police used a helicopter and cadaver dogs to aid in the search after Audrey vanished. Officers investigated every building, path, and body of water within a 9-mile radius, as well as her home route and other detour routes she may have taken. The mother of 3 went missing, and she was never recovered. In relation to the case, over 1,000 leads were followed up on, but none of them materialized. Law enforcement was tipped off in 2018 that the 31-year-old's remains was interred on a nearby property. Nothing was discovered despite the fact that investigators used cadaver dogs to search the area on foot and emptied a nearby pond. Jeff, Audrey's spouse, has faced criticism for his actions after her abduction throughout the years. According to officers who spoke with True Crime Daily, Jeff was reasonably cooperative, but they would not go into additional detail. Although he voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test and permitted investigators to inspect the family home, his actions in other situations have drawn harsh criticism. Jeff reportedly declined to assist with the initial search when Audrey vanished. Additionally, he doesn't participate in the fundraisers that friends and relatives still organize to help them search for the mother of 3 more times. There are also unconfirmed allegations that his polygraph tests yielded inconclusive results. Furthermore, polygraph examinations are unreliable in determining the truth, as we have repeatedly stated on the channel. Interestingly, no one has ever been able to explain why Jeff would wish to make his wife vanish. By all accounts, the marriage seemed content, and neither of them appears to have had an affair. Jeff wouldn't have a financial incentive either, since he and his family were already well off. Sancier has expressed her opinion that Jeff avoids speaking with the public in order to keep the kids safe, and other family members have mentioned that he was upset after the kids vanished. However, A few of Audrey's friends have mentioned that they are leery of the father of two. A local allegation that Audrey, 31, was kidnapped by Russian mob members is the source of another explanation in her case. This is due to the fact that the Heron family's golf course did, at one point, have a silent Russian partner. Local rumor had it that the family owed this unnamed Russian guy a huge amount of money. Thus, in order to make the family pay up, Audrey was kidnapped. Police looked into this idea and even stationed an officer at the family home in case they were the target of a ransom demand. However, the authorities eventually discovered no proof that this was the series of incidents that resulted in her disappearance. The most recent idea on Audrey's case holds that she was the victim of a straightforward accident and that her car and remains are waiting to be discovered someplace in a body of water. This is due to the fact that the region she was traveling in the night before she vanished was dimly lit and highly forested. As previously mentioned, Audrey's car lacked fog lights, and the weather was damp and misty. It's likely that the severe weather and low illumination caused her to get disoriented or visually impaired, and that's how her automobile ended up immersed in a body of water somewhere. Audrey was last seen alive 2 decades ago. Her phone has not been used, her bank account has not been accessed, and her credit cards have not been used in the years since she vanished. Investigators observed that they were unable to connect when they tried to ping her phone. Now that they are now adults, Audrey's daughters Sonia and Katie have both chosen to become nurses. When Sonia talks about her mother, she smiles and recalls their fun times together, including going to dinner and getting manicures, as well as playing video games. Investigators claim that while there are a number of people of interest in the investigation, their identities have never been made public. Jeff Heron has never, as far as we are aware, been identified as a suspect or person of interest. Since Audrey's car has never been found, there may have been foul play in her case. Audrey Mae Heron, age 31, was last seen leaving the Columbia Green long-term care facility for her home in Freehold on August 29, 2002, at approximately 11 p.m. Notably, sources indicate that she was last seen in Cairo, New York. According to the Charlie Project, Audrey was wearing a yellow gold necklace, a dark green medical scrub set, a blue turtleneck top, and a white metal face watch with a white leather band when she vanished. She is described as a white woman with hazel eyes, dark blonde to light brown hair, and a scar that covers part of her right thumb. On the inside of her right knee, she also has a mole. Standing at 5 feet tall and weighing approximately a pound 105, she is a small individual. She is known to smoke cigarettes and may wear spectacles. Turk is her maiden name. She will be 51 years old if she survives. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Beverly Potts. Elizabeth and Robert Potts welcomed Beverly Rose Potts into the world on April 15, 1941 in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1951, the four of them shared a residence on Linnet Avenue. Her elder sister was named Anita. Beverly, who was 10 years old at the time, was regarded as a quiet, reserved, and responsible young lady. Despite her early age, she was a dependable babysitter, had a keen interest in the performing arts, and avoided social situations with strangers to the greatest extent possible since she was timid and afraid. Less than a quarter of a mile from where the girls resided, Halloran Park was the destination that Beverly rode her bike to with her friend and neighbor Patsy Swing on August 24, 1951, at approximately 7 o'clock in the evening. Every summer, the park hosted a show wagon, which featured children's performances. The two had been granted permission to attend. For the girls, this was a rare pleasure because the park was usually off-limits after dark. The area was frequently inhabited by vagrants, and the trees had a tendency to obstruct any light coming from the stars above and the streets below. The girls came home to drop off their bikes at 8 p.m., deciding that it would be much easier to navigate the park without them. Then, they went back to the park. After 45 minutes, Patsy Swing recommended to Beverly that they start their journey home, since Patsy had a curfew of 9 p.m. But Beverly could wait until after 9 to return home, so she chose to remain by herself in the park. Patsy walked away. When she last saw Beverly, she was observing the performance on stage with the crowd. The show ended at 9:30 p.m., and people started to leave the park. A 13-year-old child who was acquainted with Beverly observed her moving diagonally in a northeastern direction across the park, approximately 150 yards from the intersection of Linnet Avenue, West A100, and 17th Street. This made sense because the 10-year-old would be arriving at her front door in just a few minutes after taking the quickest route home. Beverly walked with her toes pointed outward, giving her a distinctive, quote, duck-like gait that allowed the boy to identify her. Witnesses reported seeing a girl who appeared to be Beverly close to a black 1937 Dodge that was idling at the intersection of West A100 and 17th Street. The girl was talking to two men who were inside the automobile. This meeting occurred between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m., according to witnesses. Throughout these sightings, the girl never got inside the car. It should be noted that Beverly was incredibly shy, especially with men, and would frequently run away rather than engage in conversation. If the girl was the soon-to-be missing 10-year-old, then it seemed strange that she would stop and speak to two unknown guys in a car. It's possible that the girl wasn't Beverly at all, or that she knew the males. Beverly never made it back home. Her family started looking for her around 10 o'clock at night, but they were unsuccessful and called the police. After a thorough search, the authorities were unable to locate the missing girl. They canvassed the neighborhood and surrounding areas door to door in the days that followed her disappearance. They employed a plane to inspect open railway carriages, they investigated vacant parking lots, and they tracked suspicious autos. But all of these attempts were in vain. Numerous media outlets covered the story extensively, which resulted in thousands of tips pouring into the local police agencies. The family was exonerated of any and all responsibility for the disappearance, including Beverly's 22-year-old sister Anissa. Investigators concluded that Beverly appeared to have been abducted since she led a stable life, was content and well cared for, and had no obvious reason to flee. Her father's union offered a $1,000 reward, roughly $15,000 in today's dollars, shortly after she vanished. Considering the 10-year-old's aversion to strangers, rumors circulated that she had been tricked into a familiar person's house or vehicle under the pretense of a babysitting job or a claim that they required assistance with errands or were prepared to take her home. This gave the impression that she had been snatched by a neighborhood resident. But the sole known search of any surrounding buildings was done in 1973 in the basement of what was then an auto shop. But no proof pertaining to Beverly's case was ever found. The 10-year-old went missing, and in the months and years that followed, no credible local suspect was found. Many speculated that Beverly might have been enticed away by an unidentified woman since, while she had been cautioned against unfamiliar men, she had not received the same warnings regarding women. This was one argument put forth. In the years since Beverly vanished, the case essentially became cold and leads became hard to come by. Yet there have been a number of suspects and admissions connected to her disappearance. A vagrant called Harvey Lee Rush claimed to have killed Beverly in 1955 after enticing her to a nearby bridge with candy. Rush gave this statement to Californian police authorities. But a year after her disappearance, in 1952, he claimed to have killed her, leaving a gap of 12 months. Rush said that he had lied only to get back to Cleveland after being extradited there. Two retired Cleveland detectives, James Fust and Robert Shankland, came clean in 1980 about who the killer was. They say that in 1974 they were contacted by a man who said he had received a letter from his brother confessing to the crime. In 1966, his brother left Cleveland when he was accused of kidnapping two young girls. When authorities found and questioned the brother, he revealed that he had been living close to the park in 1951 and had a tendency of kidnapping young girls and assaulting them sexually. He said that although he had flashes of memory regarding a girl named Beverly, he didn't remember specifically kidnapping her. Since then, the investigators had been convinced of his culpability. Nevertheless, despite the letter that seemed to clear everything up, there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him in relation to Beverly's case. A former funfair employee from Ohio called William Henry Redmond was another person of interest in the disappearance of Beverly Potts. In 1988, Redmond was charged with the 1951 Pennsylvania murder of an 8-year-old girl. He boasted about having slain other young females while incarcerated. However, he steadfastly refused to provide an explanation when questioned about Beverly by the authorities. Redmond had a history of convictions for child abuse dating back to 1935, when he was just 13 years old, and he was in the neighborhood when he vanished. In the 1990s and 2000s, leads continued to come in on the case despite its age. A note claiming that her husband had killed Beverly and that she had seen him trying to dispose of the body in their furnace was discovered beneath the carpets of a Cleveland home in 1994. This letter, which was written in 1960, was discovered in a Midvale Avenue home. Real estate data were used to locate the letter's author, who was 83 years old when she was located in 1994. The woman acknowledged that the letter's allegations were untrue and that her spouse had already passed away. She had composed it as a dream of retaliation against her violent husband. Then, beginning in 2000, a writer called Brent Larkin of the local newspaper Cleveland Plain Dealer started getting letters about the case. The author claimed to be an elderly guy who, before he passed away, wished to confess to killing Beverly and abusing her sexually. On August 24, 2001, the 50th anniversary of Beverly's abduction, he promised to turn himself in, but he never did. He apologized once more in writing, saying he would never be able to keep his word after being placed in a nursing home. Out of the 4 letters that Brent Larkin received, 2 included information on the kidnapping and the murder. A letter claimed to contain a rare coin and a sealed brown parcel that Beverly had in her purse the night before she vanished. Brent was promised these things, but as of 2020, he hasn't gotten them. It was determined by authorities that these letters were penned by a single individual, most likely an elderly sick guy. They were never able to determine his identity, though. There are investigators who think these exchanges were real. An anonymous source revealed details on one of the case's suspects in August 2019. After reviewing the caller's information, the police said they needed more details and urged the person to get in touch with them again. Nevertheless, everything seemed to line up. The $25,100 Crime Stoppers reward has been increased to $15,000. Nearly 70 years later, the unsettling case of Beverly Potts continues to be explored and has served as the basis for numerous books and films. The sad and enigmatic case of Beverly Potts is still unresolved as of right now. Moving on to the next case. Billie Jean Hayworth and Billy Payne. Billy Payne, 36, and his fiancée, 23-year-old Billie Jean Hayworth, perished in this terrible event. They were mercilessly murdered to death in their own house on January 1, 2012. Despite being covered in his mother's blood, their 7-month-old boy, who was shockingly there during the horrific event, miraculously escaped uninjured. These callous killings stunned and horrified the small Tennessee hamlet of Mountain City. But even more shocking was what surfaced during the murder investigation. A Facebook feud. Janelle Potter, a 31-year-old introverted lady, was at the epicenter of this mayhem. For months, Janelle, who had struggled with health challenges since she was a youngster, had been the target of constant threats and hurtful remarks on Facebook. She claimed that these threats were the work of the deceased couple. Is this lethal conclusion really the product of a risky game driven by retaliation, as everyone seemed to believe? This idea wasn't completely out of the question because of the participation of Janelle's loving boyfriend and protective parents. Still, the tale was anything from simple. This already bizarre story was made even more complicated by covert recordings, cryptic confessions, and the appearance of an enigmatic CIA agent. The murders on Facebook turned into a tale where truth turned out to be stranger than fiction. Despite its reputation as a kind and inviting community, Mountain City seems to have a less than ideal attitude toward immigrants. Janelle Potter, a sheltered young woman who arrived there in 2005 at the age of 24, at least thought that. It seemed sense that Jonelle would feel like an outcast given her unusual life experiences. Jonelle Lee Potter was Marvin and Barbara Potter's second daughter, born in Pennsylvania on April 27, 1981. But from the start, Janelle had many obstacles. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at an early age and had learning, hearing, and speech impairments, so her path was different from her peers. Her overly protective parents had ingrained in her the attitude of being particularly cautious about her health throughout her infancy. Janelle discovered that her parents continued to have strict control over her even as she grew older. This control encompassed a number of personal domains, such as the ban on having boyfriends or owning a car, experiences that were common for people her age. Janelle's health and learning disabilities qualified her for a monthly Social Security disability check, but she was still financially dependent on her parents. Her mother Barbara found employment at the well-known international IT giant Hewlett-Packard after relocating to Mountain City. Her father Marvin, also referred to as Buddy, was crippled and retired. On the other hand, Marvin had a fascinating background. He was a Marine in Vietnam and claimed to have had contact with the CIA. However, this was never verified. Whatever the reason for his passions, Marvin loved guns. His home was filled with a variety of weapons and ammo, and he even had decorations made out of bullets for his oxygen tank. Although her parents followed their own passions, Janelle had no meaningful job. With her infantile voice, social awkwardness, and nearly 6-foot height, she found it difficult to make new acquaintances. Because of this, she was confined to their remote ranch house and spent much of her time inside. Her room was decorated with posters and plush toys that reflected her personality and seemed to agree with her mother's feelings. It looked like it belonged in a 4th-grade classroom. Janelle, like many others who would rather be alone, turned to social media as her main source of support and interaction with the outside world. She was characterized on Facebook as a kind someone who loved life and taking pleasure in making other people laugh. She found it difficult to utilize social media as a way to avoid her parents' prying eyes, though, as they kept a careful check on everything she did online. When Janelle was 30 years old in 2009, she was presented with an uncommon chance to interact with people outside of her computer screen. She befriended Tracy Greenwell, the pharmacy clerk, on one of her rare solo trips to the store, one of the few places she was permitted to go alone when her mother was busy. Tracy knew Janelle from her past trips and recalled her appearance from her initial visit. Afterwards, Tracy said that she chose to talk to Janelle and offer her a hand of friendship because she was compassionate for her. Janelle's life would ultimately be altered by this one experience. Janelle and Tracy met, and Janelle began spending a lot of time together after that. Janelle experienced her first taste of the outside world through her interactions with Tracy's relatives and friends. She observed the sharp contrast between their lively way of life and the cozy setting she was used to back home. She discovered an entirely new world of adventure by trying new things and participating in sports like rock climbing when she was with them. Additionally, Tracy introduced Janelle to Billy Payne, aka Bill, her brother. Following his high school graduation, Bill worked at the nearby thread factory. He was described as an extroverted, compassionate, and charming man. He was well known for his sense of humor and had a gift for making people smile and brightening the mood. Though Janelle's sentiments were not returned, some people thought she had a secret crush on Bill. Bill had met Billie Jean Hayworth at work, and the two were in a devoted relationship. Even though Bill and Billie Jean were 13 years apart, they had a close relationship, and Bill had fallen in love with Billie Jean. By 2011, they had a son in their lives and were engaged. They looked forward to becoming married and shared a happy future together, which defined their relationship. Tracy realized there would be no future chances in a new relationship with Bill, so she introduced Janelle to her cousin Jamie Kurt. Jamie had Janelle's traits of being somewhat of a loner who loved computers. Their common hobbies caused them to bond, and they soon began dating. They had to hide their relationship from Janelle's conservative parents, though, since they knew they wouldn't approve. When Janelle finally brought Jamie's parents to meet him, they mistook their friendship for something more than what it really was. Because he was a computer repairman, Jamie was always welcome to visit the Potter residence anytime Marvin or Barbara needed assistance with the family computer. The pair carried on their romance behind her parents' backs. Jamie even gave Janelle a cell phone for covert contact. It seemed like Janelle's life was turning around at last. She had a guy she cared about and had discovered a supportive network of friends. But at this same period, Janelle began to face constant harassment on her Facebook attacks. Following Janelle's disclosure of the internet threat she was facing to her mother, Barbara became extremely alarmed. Barbara took matters into her own hands and made a Facebook plea asking the harasser to cease the harassment in an effort to resolve the situation. She also threatened to involve the authorities if the harassment persisted. When Barbara asked Janelle who she thought the culprit may be, she said it might be Billie Jean Hayworth. However, why would Billie Jean take such a harsh stance? Janelle claimed that Billie Jean was jealous of her appearance and worried that Bill would dump her and their child in favor of Janelle. She even told her parents that the scary drives past their house and constant prank calls were caused by Billie Jean. On the other hand, Billie Jean told a few pals that Janelle was harassing them. They thought Janelle was jealous and harbored affections for Bill, even though she was in a committed relationship. Both men supported their partners throughout the intricate web of accusations and social media warfare. Bill believed Billie Jean was innocent, and Jamie agreed with Janelle's assertions. The family was split into rival groups as a result of the breach this disagreement generated between the formerly close buddies. The argument caused Jamie and Bill's connection to worsen even though they are cousins. At one time, Janelle reported the issue to the police as a result of her worries. When big boulders were hurled into the Potters' front yard, the conflict became more serious and involved violent threats. Barbara called the police for help because she was concerned for their safety. The names of Bill Payne and Billie Jean were inscribed on the rocks, and one rock said, "I am your Huckleberry," according to police photos. Janelle's parents were quite worried by the episode, even though there were no immediate consequences. All of the individuals involved unfriended one another on Facebook after this uncomfortable incident. Since everyone has been unfriended, one would think that the story would finish here, but it was far from ended. Around 10:30 a.m. on January 31st, 2012, a concerning 911 call was received by the Tennessee Johnson County Sheriff's Office. Billy Payne and Billie Jean's close friend, who had stopped at their house earlier that day, received a disturbing phone call. When she had arrived, she had found the couple's back door wide open, and when she had gone inside, she had seen a terrifying scene. Tragically, the young parents had died from gunshot wounds in different rooms. Their 7-month-old kid, albeit covered in blood, was discovered in his mother's arms unharmed despite the terrifying circumstances. Tyler, strangely enough, said nothing at all during the entire incident. Murder was an uncommon incident in their close-knit tiny town. As soon as local law enforcement learned of the double homicide, they informed the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, realizing they needed more help to solve the case. Investigators knew right away that this particular homicide case would not be like any other. There were no observable clues at the crime scene, and there was conspicuously little forensic evidence. The lack of any noteworthy new murder weapon discovered after post-mortem investigations seriously hampered the investigation's progress. At first, the police thought that the terrible scene at the couple's house might have been the product of a marital dispute, possibly a murderous suicide. But as they interviewed acquaintances and relatives to piece together the couple's life, this notion gradually became implausible. Because methamphetamine residue was found at the site, the investigators also looked into the possibility that the altercation was drug-related. Given Bill's past drug usage and the drug-related problems Mountain City was facing, there was conjecture that drugs may have had a role in the crime. The lack of any stolen goods from the house led to the eventual rejection of this theory. News of the double murder quickly traveled across the small town as investigators looked for more clues, shocking everyone in the area. Still, the heightened consciousness also led to conjecture and mistrust leveled at certain persons. The day following the killings, on February 1st, 2012, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents, along with Chief Deputy Joe Woodward of the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, interviewed Janelle and her parents, Barbara and Marvin, at their residence. They had no idea that the interview had been secretly videotaped. The Potters were initially sympathetic, but quickly went on the defensive. After a while, Janelle started to disclose the hostility between the two groups, even bringing up Bill's drug usage in the process. Then, with his recent falling out with his cousin and its possible connection to the case, the emphasis turned to Jamie. Investigators thought it crucial to talk about his relationships with the family. They were shocked to see that Janelle still seemed to be keeping her relationship with him a secret. However, Janelle angrily denied any guilt when asked about her role in the killings. After the Potter family failed to provide any valuable information, the investigators were forced to start over from scratch. However, they got a tip on the second day of the investigation that would fundamentally alter how the questioning went. The tip stated that Jamie and Bill had gotten into a heated Facebook fight during which Jamie allegedly threatened to hurt Bill. This information held too much importance to disregard, considering their pre-existing suspicions regarding Jamie and his intentions. On February 2, 2012, they didn't waste any time in bringing Jamie in for questioning at the police station. Jamie told the police that Bill was angry with Jamie for sticking up for Janelle on social media during the argument. Following more interrogation, the police asked Jamie directly if he was accountable for the deaths of Bill, his own cousin, and Billie Jean, Bill's fiancée. Even after Jamie denied any involvement, detectives had doubts about him. The police performed their duties with diligence during the inquiry, examining hearsay, confirming alibis, and reviewing ballistic reports. Billy Payne and Billie Jean's devastated family said their final goodbyes 4 days after their sad killings. Detectives decided to give Jamie Curd a polygraph test on February 6, 2012, 2 days later, and he failed spectacularly. According to the test results, he had made up the identity of the killer. As a result, the detectives called him in for additional interrogation, this time with the specific goal of extracting a confession. Following several hours of questioning, Jamie eventually acknowledged his role. He disclosed that he watched on as Marvin committed the killings. Jamie had gone so far as to describe how he had sliced Bill's throat. The investigators came to the conclusion that Marvin and Jamie were both involved in the murders, but they still wanted to find out how much Janelle and Barbara had been involved. Sadly, Jamie was unable to offer a conclusive response to this important query. The questioning appeared to be winding down when an unexpected turn of events occurred. Jamie mentioned the CIA absent-mindedly, and the detectives couldn't figure out why he would bring it up. As they dug deeper, Jamie started telling a strange story. He claimed to have been texting Chris, a person posing as Janelle's friend and employed by the Central Intelligence Agency, about his activities. Chris's job was supposedly to keep Janelle safe from her adversaries. The investigators, however, thought this story was utterly ridiculous. What may be the motivation behind a CIA agent getting involved in a small-town internet dispute? Was Jamie making these things up? In addition, questions were raised about Jamie's assertion that Marvin's disability precluded him from being the murderer. Is it feasible that Jamie took action on his own to safeguard his girlfriend and obtain hard evidence? Jamie was given the go-ahead by the cops to discreetly record Marvin's admission over the phone. Jamie called the Potter house that evening. Marvin didn't directly confess to the crime, but his words were sufficient enough for the authorities to move further. On February 7, 2012, early the following morning, Johnson County Sheriff's Office deputies carried out a search warrant at the Potter home. The officers told Marvin that he was being arrested for the double murder as soon as he left the residence. Marvin was arrested and handcuffed while the search at the Potter residence got underway. After that, he was being questioned at the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. Marvin first denied having anything to do with it. As a result, the investigators chose to take a different tack, which allowed Marvin to accuse Jamie. The detectives adopted a more sympathetic tone and stopped the aggressive interrogation. After 4 hours of hard interrogation, Marvin's story finally began to come together. The detectives surmised that Marvin was grappling with a moral conundrum, thinking that his acts were appropriate. As far as Marvin was concerned, he was just shielding his daughter from anyone who might harm her. He did, however, accept full responsibility and refute any claim that his wife or daughter were involved in the murder. However, Barbara was reluctant to acknowledge Marvin's involvement in the heinous act. In the meantime, the police kept searching the Potter residence in an effort to find any tangible proof connecting Marvin Potter to the deaths of Billy Payne and Billie Jean Hayworth. It was clear that the Potter residence was anything from ordinary. Not just guns, but several other weapons were discovered all over the house. There were also a lot of knives found. There were also other strange objects in there. Barbara Potter was seen by one officer tearing up a piece of paper that was discovered on the living room coffee table. The officer moved quickly to get a view of the material, which was a printed-out picture that she and a few of her pals had downloaded from Billie Jean Hayworth's Facebook page. While there were no immediate repercussions for Barbara's attempt to destroy the evidence, it did cause suspicion among the authorities. They started to wonder if she might be hiding something. When Marvin's truck was being searched, authorities discovered 3 enormous white garbage bags full with torn paperwork. Once these bags were taken into custody for additional investigation, important evidence was found. The Potter residence yielded 51 items in total, including the family computer that Janelle used on a regular basis as evidence. Following the inquiry, Marvin Potter and Jamie Curd faced first-degree murder charges in connection with the brutal deaths of Billy Payne and Billie Jean. The distraught loved ones of the departed couple felt some relief at this development. On the other hand, Barbara was discouraged by what was happening. The detectives needed several months to carefully put the material they had gathered together. But as they dug more, they discovered something surprising. The 3 garbage bags that were seized from Marvin's truck contained shredded documents that the detectives carefully rebuilt. They found more than 100 pages of paperwork among the pieces, which showed a trail of thousands of emails that Barbara had exchanged with Chris, the CIA agent Jamie had previously indicated. The majority of these emails were cautions regarding potential dangers to Jonelle's life. Chris showed surveillance footage showing Billy and Billie Jean were preparing to hurt Jonelle. Chris took advantage of Janelle's parents' tendency to be overly protective by highlighting the seriousness of the threat and the requirement for quick action. He promised to cleanse their identities and convinced Barbara and Marvin that their efforts to protect Janelle would absolve them of any guilt. In the end, Chris tricked Barbara into believing that Marvin, her former Marine spouse who loved guns, would kill Billy and Billie Jean. Emails that were later discovered showed that Barbara was involved in setting up the scheme to have Jamie help Marvin carry out the killings. Barbara once sent Chris an email expressing her wish for peace, but also her readiness to take drastic steps if needed. This revelation demonstrated Barbara's active role in convincing her husband to conduct the murder as well as incriminating her in the scheme. An unanswered question at the heart of the case continued to be the mysterious Chris. How could an operative of the Central Intelligence Agency change into an enigmatic guardian angel for a small-town woman? Investigators saw the necessity for a comprehensive inquiry because there were a lot of unsolved questions. But none could have anticipated the dramatic storyline twist that was waiting to be revealed. Unexpected information was discovered when the IP address connected to Chris's emails was traced. The Potter family's home computer was at the same address. Furthermore, by means of forensic linguistics research, the investigators detected noteworthy correspondences in the grammar and spelling faults between the communications sent by Chris and Janelle, who experienced learning challenges. An inescapable conclusion resulted from this information. Chris, the alleged agent of the Central Intelligence Agency, was a figment of Janelle Potter's imagination, a carefully crafted internet character. By disguising herself, Janelle tricked her gullible parents and her enamored lover into pursuing retribution on her behalf. On August 12, 2013, Barbara and Janelle were apprehended without opposition for their roles in the killings of Billy Payne and Billie Jean more than a year earlier, based on strong evidence. Both were accused of 2 counts, each of first-degree murder and murderous conspiracy. At the time of their capture, Marvin and Jamie were already detained pending their trials. All of the Potter family members entered not guilty pleas in spite of the overwhelming evidence. In October 2013, Marvin was the first to go on trial. With testimony from Mountain City neighbors on Marvin's intimidating behavior and his confession, the prosecution made a strong case. It was clear that getting beyond Janelle would require addressing her father, a combat veteran. It came to light during the trial that Marvin had been convicted in 2004 of making up medals from the Vietnam War. Marvin's integrity and his purported CIA ties were called into question by this disclosure. The trial went well in spite of the efforts of his defense team. In about 3 hours on October 11, 2013, the jury found Marvin guilty of the killings and sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms. On the other hand, Jamie and the state came to a plea deal wherein he acknowledged 2 charges of first-degree murder and facilitation. The evidence shown throughout the trial revealed a different picture, one that contradicted Jonel's adamant denial and revealed the devious manipulation that not only caused the tragic loss of 2 lives, but also severely damaged the lives of those who were left behind. With Janelle and Barbara, the prosecution had a difficult case to make. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence against Barbara and Janelle, but no hard forensic evidence connecting them to the crime. The 2 women angrily denied having anything to do with the killings. Janelle even went so far as to say that she wasn't the one posing as Chris, the agent from the Central Intelligence Agency. Barbara insisted that someone else had corresponded with Chris using her email address, and she contended that it was impossible to establish her identity as the sender of those messages. Even though neither woman was physically present at the murder scene, the prosecution had to persuade the jury that both of them were guilty of murder in order to get a verdict in their favor. The prosecution used digital evidence throughout the first 4 days of the trial to show that Janelle had lied to her parents and boyfriend, Jamie, in the year before the killings while posing as the imaginary Chris. She did not actually participate in the killings of Billy and Billie Jean. Instead, she was the mastermind behind them. Barbara, however, was depicted as actively taking part in the lethal plot. Jamie Curd, the prosecution's principal witness, was then called to testify. Regretfully, the testimony did not go as planned. He said no when asked if Janelle and Barbara had planned the crime with him. In spite of this, they asked him to retell the events of the day of the killings, and this was a vital piece of proof that Janelle was aware of the planned crime beforehand. The prosecution also stressed that Jonel's allegations that Billy or Billie Jean had threatened her or her family were never verified. They maintained that Janelle's jealousy, specifically her failure to gain Billy Payne's affections, was the root of the whole situation. Additionally, it was disclosed that Janelle had previously been the target of separate restraining orders from 2 different women. The first instance occurred in May 2011, when a lady reported that Janelle had begun harassing her on Facebook after she had deleted her as a friend a few months prior. She claimed that Janelle harassed her over the phone 5 to 20 times a day. In the same month, a second woman came forward with comparable charges against Janelle. But Janelle's defense group was prepared with a plan. 2 expert witnesses were called by them to testify. An expert in cybersecurity testified as the first witness, claiming that IP addresses are only used to identify devices, not particular people, and that it is therefore impossible to establish with certainty who used the computer. The neuropsychologist who examined Janelle was the second witness. The evaluation revealed that Janelle was essentially acting like a child and lacked the mental capacity to have planned such atrocities. There were several witnesses in the courtroom, but one prosecution witness in particular stood out. Unexpected witness Chris Jaden, a Delaware police officer who had graduated from high school with Janelle, was present. Janelle had surprisingly used Chris's identity for her online persona. The real Chris had not seen Janelle for nearly 15 years, so he hardly remembered her. Janelle appeared to have been obsessed with Chris for a very long time. In order to fabricate a phony Facebook profile that she would use to trick her parents, she had acquired pictures of Chris off the internet. Chris, on the other hand, had never spoken to Janelle or been acquainted with a Billy or Billie Jean. Following an 8-day trial, the jury debated for 5 hours after hearing arguments from both sides. In the end, the mother and daughter were found guilty by the jury. More than 3 years after the horrific killings of Billy Payne and Billie Jean, on July 7, 2015, Barbara and Janelle were each given 2 life sentences. Beverly Garland, Bill's mother, gave a moving victim impact statement during the sentence. The case offered a perplexing circumstance in which an emotionally challenged individual, who was purportedly acting with a childlike mentality, managed to significantly influence her family. During a 2016 interview, Barbara acknowledged her mistakes. After one of her appeals was approved, her request for a new trial was granted in August 2021. It was argued that because her first attorney had defended her husband Marvin in the 2015 trial, he had a conflict of interest and she should have been given a new trial. But Barbara chose to enter a guilty plea in November 2021, which resulted in a 25-year sentence being imposed instead of the original one. However, Janelle insists that she was a real victim of cyberbullying and that she had nothing to do with the killings. Gary Ridgeway, aka the Green River culprit, was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, on February 18, 1949. After his first 5 victims were discovered in the Utah Green River, the media gave him this moniker. Longtime employee of a truck firm, he was a painter. Gregory and Thomas Edward were his 2 siblings. His parents were Mary Rita and Thomas Newton Ridgeway. He was wed to Judith Lorraine Lynch from 1988 to 2002, Marcia Laureen Brown from 1973 to 1981, and Claudia Craig Barrows from 1970 to 1972. Matthew was the only son he had. In 49 different cases that occurred between 1982 and 1998, possibly as recently as 2001, Ridgeway was found guilty. Based on verified cases, he became the second most prolific serial criminal in American history. Since his prostitution-related arrest in 1982, he has been a suspect in the cases. But at that point, investigators were unable to connect him. His involvement remained unproven until 2001, when developments in DNA technology enabled investigators to connect a saliva sample they had taken from him in 1987 with masculine DNA discovered on other victims. On November 30, 2001, he was apprehended while departing from his employment at the Kenworth Truck Factory in Renton, Washington. When Ridgeway was taken into custody, more than 10,000 pieces of gathered, recorded, and preserved evidence were ready for trial, according to Dave Reichart of the King County Sheriff's Office. Investigators discovered at the time that he was not very accurate in connecting disposal sites to the victims he had placed there. He led the task group to the remains of 3 more victims thus far, and he was mistaken regarding the identities of 2 of the victims. He entered guilty pleas in 48 crimes in 2003 and his 49th case in 2011. He was given a life sentence without the prospect of release on December 18, 2003. He avoided execution as a result of a plea agreement in which he promised to reveal the whereabouts of women who were still unaccounted for. He is a prisoner at Walla Walla's Washington State Penitentiary. It was said that prostitutes and other women in precarious situations, such as runaways who were minors, made up the majority of Ridgeway's victims. The ages of his victims ranged from 14 to 38. He claimed in a confession that he picked prostitutes as his victims because he knew they would not likely be overlooked. One of the prosecutors working on the case, Patty Eakes, said she was still concerned about Ridgeway's lack of feeling when he finally acknowledged killing the ladies. She claimed that Ridgeway appeared to be a typical, silly middle-aged man. Because of his amiable demeanor, several victims might have felt at ease getting into his truck. I believe he sought out ladies who were weak. There was this odd undercurrent in him that made him want to feel as though he was with a stunning woman. The women he picked up were usually pretty. He desired to be one of those guys who would say, "I'm with a beautiful woman." It wasn't something he felt he possessed in his personal life. She acknowledged that physical appearance was undoubtedly a factor. Ridgeway guided the detectives to the sites where he interred one of his victims along the Green River. On August 21, 2003, teeth and 23 human bones were discovered there. They were only identified as Bone 20. After 2 decades, in 2023, Othram identified the victim as Tammy Lyles through analysis of DNA taken from the skeletal bones. Othram CEO, molecular biophysicist and genetics specialist David Middleman, stated that the DNA was deteriorated and in very bad condition. Using the sample, the business set out to create a new DNA profile. After authorities got in touch with her mother, scientists were able to identify Tammy using her reference sample. On April 23, 1985, Tammy's head and more remains were discovered in the Tualatin Golf Course close to Tigris, Oregon. In March 1988, it was discovered through Tammy's dental records. When her family buried her in the 1980s, according to her brother Jason Lyles in 2003, they were forced to utilize a baby casket since we were unable to locate every part of her body. You wonder what went wrong while you live with this for 20 years. Though I doubt I'll ever be able to go past this, I believe things would settle much more amicably if the guy said, yes, I completed it. In 1983, 16-year-old Tammy's life came to an abrupt stop. She continued to reside in Everett, Washington. On June 9, 1983, she vanished from Seattle, Washington's downtown. Patricia Cole Tyndall, the sheriff for King County, stated in 2023 that Tammy's family is unwilling to speak with the media. Cole Tyndall stated, "We appreciate your support in giving the family the privacy they seek during this time." This legal development follows the discovery of 15-year-old Lori and Reese Spotnick as another victim of Ridgeway's. On November 13, 1967, Lori was born in Juneau, Alaska. After a dispute with her mother in 1982, she vanished from sight. Her want was a horse. One belonged to a buddy. Lori told her mother that all she needed to do was pay for the stall's rent and feed. Her mom, Donna Hurley, declined. She lacked the necessary funds. She was pressed for time. 10 years earlier, her spouse had died. She raised her 2 teenagers as a single mother. It was not useful. The cause of Lori's disappearance would never be known. Her remains were identified as one of at least 49 victims after more than 40 years of mystery, an open wound, and an agonizing phantom limb. For Donna, who is 76 years old, Lori's death, disappearance, and absence have left a gaping hole that has existed for more than 40 years. About Lori's identification, Donna remarked, "I guess everybody calls it closure, but to me it was just a relief. You give up attempting to deceive yourself into believing that she is still alive and well and is happily raising a family in spite of all the what-ifs. How comes? And where has she been? Questions that race through your head. The fact that everything is no longer on your mind or shoulders is only a relief. A part of me as a mother was still living in denial." She said, "You construct a wall around these things. The difficult part is that those walls begin to fall apart." She described Lori as a firecracker who loved everything, including sports, the great outdoors, dogs, horses, and cooking. She ran track and played baseball. She enjoyed using a snowmobile. When she was 7 years old, she competed in a dog show after training the family Labrador Retriever, Ebony's Flippy Miss, also known as Flip. Donna said she could earn as without ever opening her books. After her escape, she did have one conversation with her daughter, either Thanksgiving 1982 or Thanksgiving 1983. The family was gathering at Lori's grandparents' house, which she called. She informed them that Christmas gifts would be coming their way. She claimed to be content with her life in Seattle. On December 30, 1985, approximately 3 years after Lori ran away from home, her remains were found and identified as Bone 17. Cece Moore, the lead genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolab, completed the genetic genealogy study. She attempts to construct a family tree, or a lineage for the unidentified person, by employing partial matches from numerous generations and family trees, much like a detective might. Lori had not left much of a trail, but she knew she was searching for a teenage girl. When she vanished, she was quite young. She vanished before the internet, before social media, and before people's searches online. She never paid taxes, bought real estate, or cast a ballot. Moore combed through yearbook pictures, birth announcements, and census data. She returned empty-handed. After that, she happened upon an obituary. Page 62, paragraph 1, Seattle Times, January 19, 1972. William S. Raspatnik, a Seattle native who now resides in Juneau, Alaska, is the father of Lori and William George and the spouse of Donna. Donna was aware of it. She was aware of Lori's brother, William George. She completed and sent a report to King County, and then Moore began looking for work over a year later. When Lori vanished almost 40 years ago, two cops knocked on Donna Hurley's house. Donna was identified by matching her DNA to a sample of her saliva. In the 1980s, Donna moved to Juneau, Alaska, from Centralia, Pennsylvania. There were better work opportunities, and her parents resided. She spent 10 years in the hotel industry, 13 years working in a veterinarian's office, and finally 1 year employed by the Alaska Department of Education. She is now retired and has 6 great-grandchildren and 2 grandchildren. Despite never having met Lori, they are her great and great-great-nieces and nephews. Like her father, Lori's brother too died of cancer in 2010. Donna watched news reports about the Green River perpetrator over the years. She gave it some thought every now and again. "It was Alaska that we were in." She replied, "We were so far removed. My son was still under my care. I was making an effort to ignore everything." Police would upload images and sketches of the victims on social media. Lori remarked, "I never saw anyone that I felt looked like Lori." Based on DNA evidence, police created a composite image of Bones 17 that they shared online. Fair complexion, blue-green eyes, and blonde hair. Donna remarked, "It took me a long time to admit that it looked like her." She mused to herself that Lori had curly hair, but the composite image had straight hair. Denial was a big part of it. There comes a moment when you become numb. She simply stopped to find the right words. That's a tragic way for her life to end. It infuriates me to see who did it. I'm upset with myself for not being able to stop it. And eventually, you just have to come to terms with the fact that you have another member of your family that you must continue to support. Donna remarked that Lori's father was her idol. She doesn't believe Lori ever moved on from his death when she was just 5 years old. She was little daddy's girl. She had the large blue eyes and the curled ponytails. Lori will be buried by her father in Seattle's Evergreen Cemetery. Even though the last remains in the medical examiner's office have been identified, many unsolved cases remain. According to Dave Reichart of the King County Sheriff's Office, Ridgeway claimed to have taken the lives of 65 to 70 teenage girls and women. He has entered a guilty plea to 49 instances thus far, while 51 cases have been closed. As I mentioned before, there are still parents searching for information on the whereabouts of their daughters, even though there are other unresolved cases that might or might not be related to Ridgeway. Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State approved legislation eliminating the death penalty from the state's legal system on April 21, 2023. Ridgeway may still be put to death if it is found that he committed other killings outside of Washington State, according to the King County Prosecutor's Office. Mary Pryor resided in Flint, Michigan, along with her spouse Leonard. Before selling Sweet Marie's Candy Store, they were its owners for a long time. After that, they retired to Linden, Michigan. Leonard passed away in 1990. Mary settled into the small community and remained a fixture in the years after his death. She was a devoted Catholic who frequently went to church events. Locals in Linden recall seeing her every day stroll from her house to the village cafe for lunch and dinner. While conducting training in the region on February 27, 1997, Michigan State Police K-9 teams discovered the 88-year-old Mary's body in a forested area close to her home. She'd been molested indecently, strangled, and beaten. The little Linden town was stunned by the crime. At the scene of the crime, investigators gathered the suspect's DNA. In order to gather evidence for the case, they also followed up on dozens of leads and conducted hundreds of interviews. They focused quickly on Michael Burr. He resided in a home that was only a short stroll from Mary's. Since DNA testing was not developed sufficiently at the time to verify that samples matched items found at the crime scene, investigators gathered his samples so they could be preserved. Regretfully, the investigators were unable to compile enough evidence to support a charge against him in relation to the case, even under the probable cause standard. In an effort to finally crack the case, the Michigan State Police Crime Lab and the Genesee County Police Department recently teamed up. They were able to match Michael Burr's DNA to that discovered at the location in November 2021. According to DNA evidence, there is a 1 in 1.9 octillion probability that Michael was not the cause of Mary's injuries, according to Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton. In the end, He remarked, "We all want the families of the victims to have closure. We seek closure because when a loved one is taken from you so brutally, the memory of them stays with you forever. When you are preoccupied with something, you are never able to enjoy a calm day." At the moment, Michael is being held without bond in the Genesee County Jail. Prosecutors will present the evidence against him at his probable cause hearing, which is set for November 24, 2021, in Genesee County District Court. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.